Hi, I'm Josh, back with our regularly scheduled programming now that I've finished wrapping up the year of 2025 in video form for my board games, books, and video games. We can finally put 2025 behind us and never speak of that year again, although to be quite truthful, it certainly looks like 2026 is on track to be worse than 2025 by pretty much every metric, thanks to the powers that be, the ruling elite, the wealthy CEOs, and all that stuff. But I am here to not talk about bad things, but to hopefully bring a bit of fun and happiness into your life by talking about hobbies and the games that I played specifically in January of 2026. And for this month, I have all new games to talk about. I have one new video game that has instantly become an all-time favorite, and I have 6 new-to-me board games. And this has come about because every time that my board gaming hobby seems to be at death's door, I was pretty much at a point where I was playing the occasional board game with my kids, but not really much else, and it certainly looked again like my hobby board game was about to die. Something happened to resuscitate it, and in this case it was somebody contacting me out of the blue. So a gamer had moved into the city where I live, in fact less than 10 minutes from where I actually live, and he had gone on to BoardGameGeek and found other local gamers and messaged them, including me, asking if we want to get together for some games. And it's somebody that I was familiar with because both he and I have been in the hobby of board gaming for pretty much most of the past 50 years, I would say, but certainly into modern board gaming since the early 2000s anyways. We've both been on BoardGameGeek since the early 2000s, and we have crossed paths at least once or twice at local board gaming conventions, so I knew who he was, but really didn't know the guy. And I had very mixed feelings when I got the invitation. On the one hand, I thought, life is so uncomplicated when you don't have to deal with humans. And here I am at a place where I don't necessarily have a gaming group, and I can shift my focus a little more to video games. But on the other hand, I would really like to have a local gaming group of really cool people to get together and play games with here locally. The problem being, in the past 20 plus years that I've been involved with the local gaming scene, I haven't had great results with gaming groups in general. I mean, to talk in broad stereotypes, which maybe isn't a great idea, I find myself in groups of quite socially awkward people who see me as a necessary butt in a seat to get their latest hot game played before they move on to the next latest hot new heavy Euro game that they've acquired, and they have no interest in me or my life specifically. They are just here to get their game played, and that requires other people to be around the table. Now, obviously I've met some really cool people through the hobby over the years and had a lot of really great interactions, a lot of really fun times, but that's sort of been the general feel of things. And as I've gotten older and the world has gotten crazier, I've had truthfully a harder time interacting with people, and anyone who isn't truly a good person, who truly has the best interests of their fellow humans at heart, it just is not somebody I want to be spending my time with. So, and it's always obviously very hit and miss when you're getting together with strangers. So I was hesitant. I did reply and say that I was interested, and so we started to organize a time to get together, and as that time approached and we continued to exchange messages, I imagine he sensed my increasing panic as the time approached for us to meet, but eventually we did get together. We played some games. I had a good time. I subsequently went back there at other times, and so I've played quite a few 2 players with just he and I. I've played some games with 3 players with one other person there, and I've been playing a lot of new-to-me games. To be honest, I'm rediscovering my dislike for heavier Euro-style games, i.e. the typical games that hobby board gamers enjoy playing. To be fair though, this fellow has been a really gracious host and basically said, here's my entire game collection, just pick out games that you want to play, I'll learn them and teach them to you. And so he's really been generous in terms of putting the choice in my hands, and sometimes I've chosen well, sometimes I haven't. I'm going to get to that here shortly, but first I'm going to talk about the one video game that is new to me for January. So as of the end of January, I had 15 50 hours of play into a game called Enshrouded. I'm recording this near the end of February, and that time has more than doubled already, but by the end of January I had 50 hours in. This is a game that is still in early access. It hasn't even hit a 1.0 release yet. However, it already has a massive amount of content, and I've already been enjoying it a ton. It's essentially a combination of exploration, action, adventure, survival, crafting, base building, and RPG style leveling. And with all these elements, it has a lot in common with my #1 favorite game of all time, which is Subnautica. Obviously, the settings are very different, Subnautica being an undersea survival exploration thing, this one being more of a medieval fantasy type setting, but all of the elements are really comparable to each other. Just yesterday, I also saw a YouTube commenter describe Enshrouded as Valheim with more pixels. In other words, an updated Valheim with better graphics. And what little I know about Valheim, it seems to be a legitimate comparison too. Now, when I first started into this game, I discovered very quickly that I had no idea what I was doing, and I was having trouble finding the information I needed to figure out how to play the game, so I went to some YouTube videos. I watched some videos about guides for first-time players of Enshrouded, as well as all these types of videos that say the tips and tricks I wish I knew when I had started playing Enshrouded, and so I watched a number of those videos, and that got me on track, and then once I got going, I was full steam ahead. And here is the review I wrote on Steam. I basically said that, well, this is a rating that I wrote just actually yesterday after 115 hours of playing the game. Playing, again, not version 1.0, but this is version 0.9.0.4, which feels like it's close to full release, but I'm not exactly sure about that. Anyways, skipping what I've already said about it, let's go to the first pleasant surprise is how customizable all the game settings are, which means that you can create about as easy or difficult an experience as you would like, and then continue to adjust it as you play. And you can even reduce the grind of resource collection by making the world give you double resources every time, which I'm going to get to as one of my frustrations here. Your character is also very customizable with a large skill tree that can be taken in many different directions without forcing you into a specific character trope. The world itself is very large in both breadth and depth in that it covers a huge area, but it is also full of massively tall mountains and very deep chasms. And so between those steep elevation changes and some dense foliage in places, you actually need to plane your routes in order to get where you need to go in the world. It can be a little difficult to get places, and you got to sort of figure out how to work your way past these obstacles. As far as the narrative goes, even after more than 100 hours, I'm not sure how much story there is here. There definitely seems to have been a cataclysm of some kind that has left almost no humans remaining in the world, and you do pick up scraps of information here and there, but I'm not sure if we'll end up encountering much beyond that. And then there's the building system, which has an astonishing amount of detail. I personally have never seen anything like it in any video game, and you can go on YouTube and look up Enshrouded builds and see just the most incredible buildings and structures that people have built in this game. But the game isn't without its frustrations, chief of which is the resource management aspect of very quickly filling up your little backpack, having to go back to your base to build more storage crates and then distribute your items amongst them and get everything sorted again, then go back into the world to continue where you left off. All that boring administrative work of shuffling resources around takes away from the fun exploration and adventure time. A close second is the frustration of how fiddly and difficult the building is. I hate how you have to go through the charade of having your character close to the item you're putting into place. I mean, they're trying to simulate the fact that you are physically building something, even though you're not literally right at it, you can be just close by. So instead of having to manipulate pieces from your character's very limited point of view, it would be super nice if you could just select a piece to build, and then you would float along with that piece from that piece's point of view until you have placed it in place, and then you can go back to your character again. But that's not how it works. You have to mess around with being in the exact right position to place each little block that you're trying to build. But I think the most cursing that I've done has been prompted by what should be the very simple act of picking up an item that you've put down somewhere. I have a couple of vases of flowers on tables that I simply cannot pick up because I can't get my character into just the perfect position next to it for the game to recognize that I'm trying to pick it up. And I've spent so much time trying to manipulate my character around these obstacles to pick them up and put them somewhere else, but it just doesn't work. So there are some things that do frustrate me about the game. I'm not sure what of those things will be worked out as the game continues to be developed, but all in all, Enshrouded is on track to very quickly become one of my favorite and most played video games of all time. And like I said, it has a lot of features in common with my number one favorite, Subnautica. So yeah, been having a ton of fun with Enshrouded. You are going to continue to hear about it as the months progress, because this is one that I'm going to be sticking with. Obviously, I won't get into any sort of detail with it in future months, but I'll let you know if my rating goes up or down with continued play. But now to the board games. I have 2 new acquisitions for the month of January. And with a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for allowing me to have a little bit of an entertainment budget and pick up fun games like this. So one thing that I did pick up was an expansion. This was the Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth Allies expansion. So if you've watched my videos from previous months, you'll see how big of a hit this particular game has been. And this Allies expansion is just a little mini expansion that adds a couple things to the game. Haven't had a chance to try it out yet, but I am certainly excited to give it a shot when I can. The second game was an accidental purchase. I just happened to be in my local bookstore, Indigo, and I was walking past their board game section, and I saw that they had a table of clearance items, and on this table was a game called Boop, which is a remake of a game called Boop with a Halloweenish setting, I suppose. Now, this is a game that I had my eye on as being perhaps an interesting one to try. It is very much a no-luck, highly tactical, kind of chess-like a little bit, 2-player game, and so I do tend to enjoy those type of games sometimes. But I saw that it was on this table on sale for $15 Canadian when the normal price is $45. So I was like 2/3 of the price off. Heck yeah, I'll pick it up and give it a try. I haven't had a chance to give it a try yet, but I did pick it up. As for games that I have actually played, now we're getting into these games that I have played with the new people I've been playing with locally here. I will go in order of my lowest rated to highest rated for these games. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a game called Kinfire Council. I played this one with 3 players total, myself and 2 others, and my first impressions were that I found the information load of the game to be somewhat overwhelming, because the game is based around worker placement, but it has a board with 18 or more worker placement spaces. Each of those spaces have 2 to 4 options of where you can go within the space to do something. So, which realistically means that you have probably more than 50 placement spots on the board that you can choose from, which is too much, way too much. To be fair though, by the time we got to this game, my brain was fried. This was a morning when I had gotten up before dawn to get my kids ready and off to school in the morning, and on days when I have to do that, usually I'm in bed before 9 p.m. But we were just starting this game at a time when I'd normally be crawling into bed, and I had already learned and played for the very first time both Lost Ruins of Arnak and Sanctuary, and all 3 of these games are very information-heavy, combo-rific games that require a fair bit of brain power, so I was mentally not quite there. Now, we did play in cooperative mode, fortunately, which I did enjoy. I'm glad we did it that way. The game allows you to play either cooperatively or competitively, and it does have a kind of unique victory point system where the evil AI character that you're playing against is accumulating secret victory points as the game progresses, and so you are never sure exactly what point level you need to collaboratively get to in order to beat the game. And so there's this hidden element where you're just hoping you've done well enough to win the game. Players who dislike a certain amount of luck or hidden information aren't going to enjoy that maybe necessarily, but I thought it was pretty cool. And I did also appreciate how asymmetrical each of the player teams were. So you play a team of characters who each have their own abilities, and that really allowed us to pick out our own little aspects of the game to focus on so that we could individually combine our abilities and work towards victory. I did kind of enjoy the play. The medieval fantasy city building theme I thought was pretty neat, but overall it was fairly dry, and like I said, just quite overwhelming with its information load. So I ultimately rate this game a 6 out of 10. Kind of a cool cooperative experience, but not a game that I loved a lot. Next up is a game called Sanctuary that I played with 3 players as well. And first of all, I have to say, I hate zoos, aka animal prisons. Really, zoos depress the heck out of me. But with this game, I did appreciate the conservation focus of the game, as well as the cute animal photos on the tiles, so that was alright. Apparently this game is based on a game called Ark Nova, which has been a huge hit in recent years, but I've never played Ark Nova. Having played Sanctuary now, though, I think I would enjoy Sanctuary more based on what I've seen, just because I tend to enjoy tile-laying games, and I love the idea of comboing abilities and points based on where you play your tiles and which ones are connected to each other and which ones aren't. So in the past, games like Castles of Mad King Ludwig I've enjoyed a fair bit that do similar things with tile placement. In this particular 3-player game that I played, I got more tiles into play than the other 2 players, but I was a distant third in the scoring because I really struggled to get anything going with the victory point combinations that I just mentioned. I noticed that the most experienced player of this game was focused on collecting a whole ton of tiles early and discarding ones he didn't want to weed through them and find just the right combos. And so while I was trying to just efficiently get my tiles into play regardless of their point values, the winner was really focused on getting these combos together. So that's something I would try differently next time. I rate this game 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. I would play it again. It's not my number 1 tile laying game, but I thought it was pretty cool. Moving on now to a game that I own, that I played with my 2 boys. This is The Hobbit There and Back Again. This is a roll and write game by Reiner the Designer Knizia, and it is now the only roll and write game I own. I guess there have been a couple in the past that I've owned. In the distant past, I had Yahtzee, and there's been some others, but up until now, I didn't have currently a roll and write game on my shelf, so I'm happy to have this one. The gameplay centers on choosing dice that are rolled in order to create pathways across your own little map with a dry erase marker. Each player has their own little play mat and marker to create their pathways. We played the first scenario out of the 8 that are in the box. The 8 scenarios follow through the events of the Hobbit book, and each one adds its own new rules and new goals and new ways to get points. So we've only played the first one so far with myself and my 2 boys, and it did work well with 3 players, but I wouldn't want to play it with just 2. I think in fact 4 might be the sweet spot for this one, because pretty much the only player interaction involves being the first player to connect different things on your board, as well as when the game end is triggered. And so if there's at least some competition for getting those bonuses, that's maybe a little bit helpful for player interaction. Although my younger son Wyatt got both the first person connection bonuses. There was 2 in the first scenario there, and he got both of them, and yet he still ended up being way behind in the final scoring. So, and I had previously seen on BoardGameGeek somebody mention that those particular bonuses should probably score more points, because it ends up being pretty negligible, and so ultimately the game has almost no player interaction whatsoever, since those might be fairly meaningless based on first impressions. Anyways, I ended the game with 65 points. I was actually in last place of the 3 of us. My younger son, who I just mentioned, got those bonuses, got 70 points, but then my older son, Evan, won with 85 points. And he said that he had, before we started playing, after I taught the rules, he had examined the board and kind of pre-planned his pathways for maximum efficiency, because he just really loves these strategic puzzly games. So I thought that was super clever of him, and both boys enjoyed it. I rate the game, just as a first impression, 7 out of 10, although like I said, there's 7 other completely different scenarios that we have to get to yet. My younger son Wyatt rates it 8 out of 10, and my older son gave it a perfect 10 out of 10, which I thought was pretty awesome. And so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what the other scenarios bring to the game. Getting back to the new game group now with The Lost Ruins of Arnak, which I played just as a 2-player experience. And my first impressions of the game were that it has a super fun theme and really great artwork and components and presentation. I really love real-world archaeology, TV shows like Time Team, I just really am into. And then with the fantasy elements added to that, I think that just ups the cool factor. So definitely cool looking game going into it. And At first glance, it's interesting because it is a worker placement based game. You only have 2 workers to place each round, and there's only 5 rounds in the game. So ultimately, you really only have 10 worker placements for the entire game, although you can get 1 or 2 bonus placements during the gameplay. But it feels like, what am I supposed to do with 10 worker placements? But it's one of those games that really steamrolls as it goes on, where the first game round's super quick, but then by round 5, there's so many moving parts to keep track of. One thing is triggering something else, which is setting off another thing, and so that final turn is really a large percentage of the gameplay. There are a lot of moving parts to keep track of during gameplay, so it's a pretty information heavy game, and despite that, it looks like there's loads of expansions that can be added, though I sure would not want to play this game with a severely AP prone player, somebody who is prone to overthinking all the options. So this did work well as a 2-player game. I'm guessing that 3 would be the sweet spot for it, as with most multiplayer games in my experience. I rate the game 7.5 out of 10. The theme definitely is really helping that rating too, but overall I thought it was a fun game. This next one is an older one called Copycat from 2012, and I played this 2-player as well. It's a 14-year-old Freedom and Freeze game where his goal in designing this game, his stated goal, was to combine the best parts of Dominion's deck building with Agricola's worker placement and Through the Ages card selection, as well as Puerto Rico's incentivized unused actions, and take those elements and combine them into a little Franken game with all the best elements of those games added together. And in my opinion, it totally succeeds. Despite the combinations of mechanisms that I just mentioned, it's a very simple game to learn and play, and as a result, it would be a great game to play with families or more casual gamers. So I enjoyed it. I do wonder if the game's simplicity and relative lack of overall card variety would hinder its replayability over time, because this is a deck building game, and as well, deck building and worker placement, I guess, are 2 of the main components of it, and it doesn't have a lot of card variety. But at least for the first play, I had a lot of fun with it. The theme itself, it has this kind of funny satirical theme that's somewhat humorous, although the components, I wasn't a big fan of the art style, but the game is just big and so easy to visualize with the way it's put together, which, as an older gentleman with rapidly worsening eyesight, I certainly appreciated how functional everything was. I rate it 7.5 out of 10. I'd love to see this game reworked with maybe an expansion added or something, but I don't know if Freedom and Freeze would ever come back to this one. But my final game and best of the month was a game called Wondrous Creatures. I played it 2 players again, and my first impressions were that the box looks like a huge book, which looks so cool on the outside, and then when you put the game on the table and set it all up, it just has the most wonderful artwork and presentation. It has these little magnetic meeples that you can put on these creatures to ride the creatures, and so the overall physical presentation of the game is just really well done. Then when you get into the game and actually play it, it's a combination of worker placement, card play, and resource management that isn't all that difficult to manage, really. The only complication is the sheer amount of information on the card row that's continually getting replaced. So you have these row of cards that are available as one of the several different things you can do on your turn. Each of the cards has a bunch of information on it about how the card works, which is fine if it weren't for the fact that that entire card row is constantly being wiped and refreshed. So if you want to do well at the game, you constantly have to be rereading every single little card, which for the sake of time I didn't bother to do. I guess once you had become familiar with the game, if you had played it enough, you could have a better idea of what all the information on the cards were and how they worked, and it might be easier to manage. But that's really the only complicated thing. Everything else is pretty straightforward. It is a very Euro-y game, but it flows well with how everything works together, and honestly, it's just so significantly elevated by its theme and presentation. I rate it an 8 out of 10, and it would definitely not be an 8 out of 10 if it wasn't such a whimsical, fun, well-presented, well-illustrated game. But it is what it is. I'm a shallow person like that, so I rate Wondrous Creatures an 8 out of 10. And that was my gaming for the month of January 2026. Please let me know what you have been playing. I would love to hear what games you've been getting to the table. Are there any new ones that you particularly enjoyed? Are there any upcoming titles that you're super excited about? You know I love to hear about that sort of stuff, so please get into the comments and tell me all about it. And in any case, I just really appreciate you watching. Cheers. A couple with 4 players, with 4 of us around the table. Is that even true? And instead, I really kind of a cool collab. And apparently this is a card-based, or getting back to the name.